Industries that are hot, sectors set to outperform the market. That's what's here in Zacks Industry Rank Analysis. This little bit of analysis is put together weekly by you-know-who, our senior market analyst, Charles Ropeblood. He's from Zacks.com, and he goes through great pains every week to compile these industry reports for us. This one on the radar this week, the electronics retailers, I should say. There are some changes going on within retail in general, obviously in this segment of the retail group here in particular.
Right, there are some very positive trends in the retail sector. I should say there's trends that are not as bad as a lot of analysts feared. We talked about this a month ago about how we saw earnings coming out that were actually better than expected. And when we look particularly at the electronics retailers, we're really seeing a particular area of strength. Specifically within this group, if you look at all the forecasts made for the current fiscal year, and keep in mind retailers' fiscal years generally end in January, so we're kind of talking fiscal 2010, we're seeing 40% of all those forecasts being revised upwards. That's a very bullish sign for any group, and we're specifically seeing it in electronics retailers, which is why I have them as the focus this week.
So is the undercurrent that exists here renewed consumer optimism?
I think it's more that consumer pessimism is not as bad as feared. We're still seeing same-store sales drop across the board, but we're not seeing the drop as bad as people feared. And a good example is Best Buy. They did see same-store sales decline, but when you look at the average ticket price, that increased. That means even though there might have been less people going to the register, when they actually went to the register, they're spending more. And on a side note, it's interesting, we're actually seeing demand for LCD TVs starting to actually pick up or at least level off. If you look at Corning, and I mention them because they're the biggest glass maker of LCD flat panel displays, I should just say flat panel displays in general, they actually said that they're now expecting orders this quarter to be down 0 to 5%. Previously, they were expecting a 20% drop. Certainly, I think part of it might be due to the conversion to digital signals for everyone's TV. Certainly, you can look at people's aging analog sets, and one of those goes, you're not going to buy another analog set unless you're really strapped for cash. You're going to buy one of the new flat panels. So that's helping. But I think in general, we're seeing that consumers are actually spending better than a lot of people thought they would. Doesn't mean that sales aren't going down, doesn't mean there still aren't negative trends, but relatively we're seeing a sharp improvement, and that's a bullish sign.
I still have one of those sets where you have to get up and turn the channel.
Well, you're just old school.
That's a different story. But every time I go to restaurants, I don't see any shortage of customers there either. So yes, people are spending yet.
They are, and actually this morning when we taped this Wednesday, April 8th, Ruby Tuesday came out with some numbers that weren't as bad as people feared, and that kind of continues a trend we've seen across the restaurant sector. I've talked about Darden before. A month ago I talked about Cracker Barrel. Ruby Tuesday is still extending that trend, and what's interesting is we're now starting to see the first hit of the Obama stimulus package in our paychecks. A lot of people, particularly anyone whose employer uses ADP, saw a little bump in their paycheck this last pay period. That should help. And I think with a lot of consumers, we're starting to see more of a nesting trend where they're staying in, because certainly if you buy a DVD, it's cheaper than taking a family of 4 out, as you well know.
Yes.
But
boy, do I.
But I think that's actually helping the retailers like Best Buy. And you look at Conn's, which is a small electronics retailer. Our listeners down in Texas will be very familiar with them. Or even GameStop, the video game retailer. All that's helping them, but we are still seeing people eat out. And I think the big fear that people would stop eating out altogether really hasn't held up. You're probably seeing a bigger drop at your high-end restaurants, but for a lot of people going to Ruby Tuesday, maybe going to an Olive Garden, a mid-price restaurant, people are still going out to eat. Again, the numbers are off from a year ago, so I don't want to paint this as rosy, but again, it's not as bad as we feared.
So let me ask you then, what type of opportunity does this present for those investors looking at the retail stock sector again?
It's interesting because we saw a huge run-up in the stock prices, and then we've actually seen them pull back over the past few days. Best Buy in particular, it's down about $3 or $4. And I think if you look relative to where these companies used to trade, the valuations are actually pretty decent, and you're looking at rising earnings estimates. So there's definitely a positive trend there, and there's definitely an opportunity. Certainly someone who's an aggressive trader needs to pay attention to the chart. Someone who's looking at more of a long-term investment, and particularly when you look at Best Buy, they're primary competitor, Circuit City's gone. Tweeter's gone. So there's a lot of long-term trends that bode in their favor. It may not be a bad time to start considering dollar cost averaging into a long-term position. And again, you also look at Conn's, another competitor who benefits from Circuit City. GameStop also benefits, but I will just point out in the case of GameStop, they're very much tied to the cycle in video game sales. And although we do have some new blockbuster games coming out there, we don't have the new consoles. So although they're expecting another good year, the growth isn't going to be what it was over the past couple years.
All right, do you own any of the stocks that you've rambled through here?
No, I do not.
All right, if you want to take a look at the text version of this week's industry rank analysis dealing with the electronics retailers, get over to Zacks.com's homepage and scan down that page until you come across the most current headline under industry rank analysis, penned by Charles Ropelet personally. With Charles, I'm Terry Ruffalo.